I've got Michael Torra here, and we're going to be discussing moral enhancement, which seems to be a large category of the Cyborg Buddha project. Previously, we spoke about Cyborg Buddha in the last video, and I thought it might be good to discuss moral enhancement in a separate video. So, yeah, look, it sounds strange that we have this, we're agents and we have our moralities. Why should we try and enhance our moralities? Isn't that something that should emerge from our intuition? What's your take on moral enhancement?
Well, moral enhancement, I think, from a historical perspective, can be seen as one of the principal goals of all the major world religions and the philosophical systems that strive for, human happiness. So, moral enhancement as a way of improving human life by making human interactions more compassionate,
Hmm.
loving, free of unnecessary friction. It's certainly a traditional goal that has been around as long as human civilization, I believe.
Hmm.
Um, the means by which this is done is only now changing, now being, in the last 100 years or so. Um, if we look at human history before the Industrial Revolution, it's religion and philosophy that has been advocating for the enhancement of human morality by various means
Hmm.
of either reason or faith.
Hmm.
And then um, after the Industrial Revolution, and there's some premonition of this in earlier writings, but the idea of using um, human reason and science and technology to create some kind of utopian system,
Hmm.
whether it's through communism or some other system that claims that uh, human beings are in their behavior determined by their circumstances, and if we improve the circumstances, then behavior will follow. Uh, is a grand program for moral enhancement. It
Hmm.
hasn't worked out
Hmm.
as planned.
Hmm.
The understanding of actual human motivation, much less economics, but just in individual motivation, was really deficient. And I think we're better now, but I don't believe that we are at a point of understanding everything that's going on.
Hmm.
The Cyborg Buddha project isn't proposing some program of social change or specific interventions to make us better, but rather a program of investigating what sort of changes and interventions might enhance our behavior and our experience. Um, could there be different pharmaceutical interventions? Could there be interventions economically and sociologically that would constitute moral enhancement?
Hmm.
These are the questions that we're looking at.
Hmm. Yeah, like I guess in order to live in more like in civilization, we need to sort of disregard some of our intuitions about in order to operate in civilization effectively, we need to disregard and pay more to some of our intuitions and pay more attention to others. We used to live in hunter-gatherer tribes of 150 or so people, a Dunbar number, and we weren't really didn't really have all that much structure. We were chaotic. We were like basically often using a lot more of like using a lot more of the resources in our environment than we would need. We'd herd animals across cliffs. and kill heaps, hundreds, in order to just eat a few, burn down forests in order to have a meal, extinct megafauna without really knowing what we were doing or the impacts on the environment and all those sorts of things. So now we have like massive amounts of people in the world and very high tech civilizations compared to what we used to have. Seems as though we're wielding a lot more sharp and powerful weapons to do both good and bad. And it seems useful to be able to be more adept at making right ethical or moral decisions than what we are biologically able to do, using our intuition only. So there's certain drugs that seem to be able to help with us making moral decisions, like oxytocin in enhancing drugs that seem to, yeah.
Yeah, certainly we, as you pointed out, have a lot more power technologically, and we have a lot more human numbers in our sheer population size.
Mm.
So our impact on the the global biological environment is much larger and potentially at a scale and magnitude that could extinguish all human life.
Yeah,
I mean,
so it's dangerous.
the yeah, we have nuclear weapons that could effectively do that,
Mm.
whereas no matter how many forest fires were started by our ancient ancestors, they weren't going to, you know, extinguish all the or cause all trees to become extinct.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, that's right. So I mean, like we have very powerful technology that feasibly we could use in order to extinguish a lot of what we value and a lot of what other sentiences in the world value. And that's considered a bad thing. So it seems that, I mean, we can use moral enhancers, whether that be app format or through drugs, in order to make better decisions in our personal life that affect our personal, local connections we have with people. But what about large-scale problems like, you, like a better decision making in how to distribute the resources that we have as dividends for our for our industry. Like, should we be focusing on spending on more money on poor countries so that they have a better quality of experience? Does a marginal increase in our quality of experience weigh up to a significant increase given the same amount of resources to people in third world countries? So yeah, these sorts of things are really hard to make decisions about, and often people just don't understand all the factors. I think that part of moral enhancement could actually be a form of like intellectual enhancement as well, having the ability to be able to look at much more variables and see things much more objectively and formally than we do. David Pierce argues for that. Yeah.
Yeah, the advantage of intellectual enhancement certainly would be that unlike distributing oxytocin, for example, um, the intellectual enhancement could go across the board, globally, entire human population, and side effects that were negative would probably be small and manageable. Whereas I see no reason that everybody should be given oxytocin. That would, that would be like mass distribution in a scattershot way.
Mm.
Um, Specific pharmaceutical interventions are more, in my view, like psychotherapy. On a case-by-case basis, some people need this, but for most people, getting oxytocin the natural way by interacting with other people in a positive way, intimate relationships, having pets, is a lot better than um, some kind of a mass drug distribution.
Mm.
There are cases though of people who are very isolated, very lonely. They have psychological issues that make it difficult for them to um, be open and to bond emotionally with other people. In those cases, oxytocin as a medical intervention could be enormously useful.
Mm.
Uh, who knows how many of the crazy Americans with guns who go out and shoot people would not have done that if this kind of intervention had taken place.
Mm.
So, that would enhance the life of that individual and would save the lives of, you know, the dozens of people who, in some cases, have been in one fell swoop killed by um, these very sick individuals.
Mm.
Uh, but the question of change the individual or change society that affects the individual goes back quite a ways in the debate over
Mm.
what to do, and I think both has to happen,
Mm.
both have to happen. Um, Currently, the system that is dominant in the world of some form of capitalism that is more or less regulated, in some cases less, in other cases more, does have the advantage of producing economic growth,
Mm.
but at a price to the environment in terms of pollution and resource use that is suboptimal and is probably using too many resources in too many cases for um, bogus needs that were created by advertising alone and are not
Mm.
needs that actually are inherent to a flourishing human life.
Mm.
The food, clothing, education, medical care, support in old age, and so forth. A lot of these are being shortchanged so that more people can have plastic toys,
Mm.
junk.
Mm.
Uh,
But doesn't necessarily make us real that much happy.
no, the consumer economy is based on continually churning over people buying things that don't last for very long, don't provide actually all that much value beyond some initial feeling of satisfaction now that the object has been attained. And either the thing breaks or one loses interest in it or a newer version comes out and so you have to upgrade to that. The marginal utility in terms of human happiness is actually fairly small, I believe.
Mm.
And at the same time, there are people who don't have enough of the basics. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough medicine, education. They're Too much of the world is very poor so that a small portion of the world can live fairly well, and a tiny portion of the world can have a hugely greater proportion of the resources, financial and otherwise,
Mm.
than they need, except to gratify their desire to be sitting at the top of a pyramid.
Mm. Yeah. Yes. Right. So this desire for having a comparative advantage over others is probably one of our strong intuitions. So you look at the hierarchical sort of structure of um, chimpanzee, uh, like groups. It's very hierarchical, and there's a lot of seems to be a lot of effort into maintaining hierarchies and maintaining that kind of like structure, which is evolutionary useful in the ancestral environment. But now that we've moved beyond that, I think that we should really not just be focusing on what's evolutionary adaptive in the ancestral environment, but what's useful today, and what discovering what we really value. There's plenty of charities. There's plenty of calculations on how to efficiently optimize spending so as to you know um, optimize your own happiness and the happiness of others, but people don't necessarily understand them or heed them anyway. Not to say that there's no more research that can be done. Absolutely, more research, please. But if people were motivated to be more moral across the board, then I'd say the net effect would be more happiness. That's a bit of a generalization because people will step in and say, "Oh, but what do you mean by morality, or what rules do you want to apply?" Well, I think it doesn't matter if you're a utilitarian, a virtue ethicist, or a deontologist. There is still there's still utility calculations, and it doesn't require you to be a utilitarianist or a consequentialist that you can sort of use in order to yeah, to I guess calculate and be more aware of the effects of actions in the world. So yeah, I think that we should. But a lot of moral enhancement so far has been education and as you say, law and politics and societal configuration. But part of the moral enhancement debate today is how to make people, how to augment humans to become more moral. Mm. So yeah, we mentioned oxytocin, but that can increase the in-group bias at the
Hmm.
expense of out-group members. But what can we do about making people, I guess, expanding the real the circle of ethical consideration, as Singer liked to say. What can we really do to make it like a core value of doing that?
Well, education in different forms, I think, is really the primary means for doing this. Uh, Oxytocin, as I said, given broadly, would not be a good idea. And as you pointed out, it would actually lead to more in-group feelings. So you love the people you're close to even more, and you become hostile to those who are not in your own circle. So, so oxytocin could lead to more war.
Mm,
Not a good idea, broadly
mm,
given.
mm,
On a targeted basis, as I said, clinically, case by case, yeah.
mm,
Um, there is a proposal by my guru, who I've mentioned before,
yeah,
Adidas Amraj,
yeah,
in a book he wrote called "Not Two is Peace."
mm,
Not hyphen two, meaning non-dual. Not two is peace. And he proposes that a number of things happen, that people look at things as in terms of the problems and solutions,
mm,
but specifically he calls for a global cooperative forum. And um, everyone on earth, every human being, is automatically a member of the Global Cooperative Forum. It's everybody all at once. There would need to be some kind of a hierarchy, but not in a traditional sense. He proposes that there be a council, a governing council that is not elected, that is not on the basis of um, a constituency. In other words, not a representative from a particular region or ethnic group or any kind of interest group like that.
mm,
But the members of this initial council that would then um, pick
mm,
their own successors would be people who are recognized very broadly, widely, preferably worldwide, as being people who have high moral standards and who previously held power but do not have it any longer. The thinking here is you want people who are competent enough to have achieved power and have seen the limitations of power within the existing structures, and who are either stepped back from that or retired from it. So they're known quantities, and they're respected.
mm,
No dictators need apply.
mhm,
And these people, because of their status, would have moral authority, moral suasion. And when they spoke on behalf of everybody all at once, humanity as a whole, they could address the nation states and the global corporations, because the global corporations are essentially exerting power in effect that is like nation states, except they're global. They're not within a nation's borders. You know, this is happening more and more, like where companies change their nationality. They move from one country to another because tax laws and other laws are more favorable to them. So they have a lot of resources and a lot of influence over politics without themselves being political entities. So
Mm.
both the nation states that are political entities and the corporations, the global corporations that are powerful non-state actors would be told by the global cooperative forum in the form of this initial and later governing council um, that in the best interest of humanity and all life on earth, the non-human living things as well, um, we believe you should stop doing X and start doing Y.
Mm.
And this is a moral leadership. This is not leadership based on guns or economic power, but on the power of everybody all at once as connected through the internet and any other means we have for mass communication where individuals can get to speak up in
Hmm.
some,
Like
sub
some form
forum.
of something similar to fluid democracy, you mean?
Something like that. It's almost a direct democracy, except there's not actually voting here.
Mm.
There's discussion and, a sense of the sense of the people of this part of the world, or the sense of the people in this community of interest is such that, and all of those would be listened to, but none of them would have authority over anyone else. And the only authority that existed would be the moral authority of this council that everyone pretty much agrees, not everyone literally, but most people agree that, yeah, we should listen to these people because on this council is this person, that I really like,
Yeah.
and this other person that I don't think as much of, but I have to admit that
Mm.
she or he, is also a person of moral standing and of experience and, competence.
Hmm.
Um, so broadly speaking, this would be an educational and influential, but not powerful in the traditional sense,
Mm.
way to put a brake on the current headlong rush of nations at war with one another and corporations that are interested in maximizing shareholder value to stop doing what they're doing that is destructive and mindless.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I mean, it would be a difficult problem to get everybody to agree on like any particular council of people. I mean, like I'd put people like Peter Singer forward, and like powerful but intelligent thinkers, without too much perverse incentive in the game.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, who would you say would be good to go on the council? Would you say like people like the Dalai Lama, or somebody like the a previous president of the United States, or what's his name? The guy who sort of did the movie An Inconvenient Truth.
Inconvenient.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Al Gore,
Al Gore.
former vice president and
Yeah.
possibly possibly elected president in the year 2000, but didn't get the office
Mm.
because the Supreme Court decided that the votes would be only checked in one part of the state of Florida and not
Mm.
all of them. It was a very close election, and many people believe the Supreme Court really decided it based on the
Mm.
fact that the majority of the Supreme Court was Republican or appointed by Republican presidents.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, Al Gore maybe was the legitimate president but didn't get it. He is one of the individuals I would like to see on an initial council.
Sure.
The Dalai Lama, personally, I would be in favor of, but because he is the head of a religion probably would be disqualified. We want someone who's non-sectarian.
Mm.
Um, the it's hard for me to reel off a bunch of names,
Mm.
but the technical issues and
Mm.
translating the ideas in the book not to his piece into a specific program and how to get from the start to the completion. In other words, organizing global cooperative forum discussions and an initial council. Um, uh, we don't know. This is something that I, as a formal devotee of Adida Samraj,
Mm.
who have worked with other devotees and talked about this, has been a tough nut to crack. Um, we have all kinds of ideas, none of which have gotten any traction. So we like the ideas. How to implement them, though, have not come up with anything
Mm.
yet that has worked.
Mm.
It doesn't mean we won't or someone else won't. I hope that someone will, and pretty soon, because I don't think we have that much more time before one or another of the many possible disasters that could occur will occur. I mean, just the odds are that something is going to happen that'll be worse than the economic meltdown of 2008, you know, or the Fukushima accident in Japan.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there could be a tipping point in like a environmental stability that actually is has a significant effect on the way that people survive in the world, and could destabilize a lot of the order that we have, to negative consequences. So yeah, that sort of thing could happen. You know, that we could develop a virus. We could develop the means of creating viruses, harmful viruses that have, you know, a long incubation state in the body, highly infectious, and then, you know, quickly flip, you know, a couple of parameters or genes or whatever, and then turn into something devastating that kill people and do stuff. Yeah, that's true. An AI like that could like do the wrong thing.
Mhm.
But you know, it's very hard for us globally to agree on making certain decisions. People have been talking about having a like a global government or world state, to make it easier to deal with these sorts of issues. What do you think?
Mhm. Um,
Is that the
I
same thing?
no, it's
Really?
definitely not the same thing. In the book, not to his piece, Adidas specifically says that having a world government would be detrimental because what we would be doing is creating the means by which the levers of power could be seized by a single individual or a small group. We don't want power to be centralized like that. That would be an attractive nuisance. That could be a real disaster.
Mm.
One of the negative possibilities is that we do end up with a single world state. That would be very difficult to get rid of. It could become extremely oppressive using the technologies we already have for surveillance, um, monitoring of individuals, control of economic activities. A world state could really enslave us all.
Mm.
So we don't want power to be centralized that much. Something not too dissimilar from the nation state system, but without the means for um, waging global thermonuclear war. Uh, there has to be some control. We, nuclear weapons sooner or later are going to be used again. Remember, they've been used twice already. And nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons. Now, the biological weapons are more difficult to create than the chemical weapons, but potentially for reasons that you described, could be far worse. If there were a virus or even bacteria that were infectious but had a latency period such that they did not manifest any negative symptoms until like the entire human population had been
Mm.
infected, and then suddenly we all come down with the symptoms,
Mm.
that would be uh, there would probably be some natural immunity by some small number of individuals. It probably wouldn't wipe out the human race, but we could go back to, what it was like in 50,000 BC.
Mm. Mm. That's true. And even if we did go back to, I mean, yeah, so there's a game out there called Pandemic, which is quite interesting, and you get to play the virus and get to intelligently direct how it will mutate, in order to balance the infectivity period, go unnoticed or be listed as something as not all that important until everybody's infected, and then start like dealing the damage. If we did go back to 5,000 years, for 50,000 years BC, it'd be a very different world than what our ancestors lived in at 50,000 BC, because there would be a whole heap of infrastructure around. I interviewed recently a guy called John Zerzan, who's an anarcho-primitivist, and he wants to take us all back to a time where we didn't have technology, we didn't have advanced forms of language, and we lived in a state much like I imagine Rousseau was referring to, but this idealistic natural man state, and
Hmm.
then problems would disappear. I'm not sure if he really wants to do that overnight through violence or anything like that. I don't think he does, but he sees that as the goal, um, because he sees this technology and all the problems that we're having are caused by us having access to powerful technology.
Well, I don't think we can put the genie back in the bottle.
Mm,
Um, if some small group wanted to go back and live that way,
mm,
that they could try that, but they would of course be vulnerable to those people who retained technology.
mm,
Um, Sort of like the uncontacted tribes in the Amazon
mm,
who are being protected
mm,
by the Brazilian government so that they aren't in uh, potential conflict, as has happened so many times, with men with guns who are looking for gold.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, well, there's a couple of things that might sort of change the way that the world thinks or how they operate, and one of them is surveillance and surveillance.
Hmm.
And so Jameis Casio coined the interesting phrase participatory panopticon, where everybody's a little brother and sister, really. And so everybody's running around with like very cheap and easy to obtain devices that record, cast, or log their life events. So that might include video, audio, and metadata acquisition, and recorded on very inexpensive but massive by our standards drives, and and then have that. And yeah, and that means that there's many perspectives on every situation. If all this information was aggregated in certain places, then people would be able to compare different viewpoints, actual video and audio viewpoints in a certain situation. It might make it very hard to lie. It might make it,
Hmm.
in order to do clandestine things, you needed to be away from the prying eyes, the prying digital eyes of these sort of life logging devices. And so yeah, everybody would then need be acting in a very different way, because people, in order to be Machiavellian, I mean, I think people are naturally Machiavellian to an extent. In order to do that, you need to go unnoticed, right? And with so much surveillance and surveillance around, it just becomes less feasible to be Machiavellian unless you are particularly careful about it. Mm. Which introduces
Yeah,
privacy concerns, but that's another possible
yeah.
possibility.
The privacy concerns are huge, and if we do manage to counterbalance surveillance with surveillance.
Mm.
So looking up from below, I think we may be able to get through this period of, potential big brother um, watching everyone for the sake of our own good, right? It's to protect us from all the threats out there. But as with the world state, this becomes a very tempting centralization of
Mm.
power.
Mm.
So the panopticon um, and surveillance is, I think, probably our best bet
Mm.
at protecting ourselves to some degree.
Mm.
Um, and some in acts, of course, if you're not interested in having your most intimate activities broadcast to the world, there has to be some agreed upon privacy.
Mm.
And your home is your castle.
Mm.
When you're inside, you can do things privately,
Mm.
and there should be some other areas that are acknowledged to be um, sacrosanct in that sense
Mm.
of private. Um, of course, what you said that Jamais mentioned about having multiple viewpoints on things to make it difficult to lie. This could be wonderful for cases of uh, courtroom justice where um, we're not relying on the word of a witness, but we have actual video from multiple viewpoints of what happened.
Mm.
Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, and not necessarily due to deliberate
Mm.
misstatement of the facts, but people simply don't remember things that well.
Yeah, like we said before, people naturally remember or interpret things according to what's convenient. Yeah, and often it may be unconscious.
Yeah, uh, which should make us very circumspect when we consider our own personal life narratives, the story that we created of how we got to be where we are now, and how much of what we think is true in our own case is something that we've made up on the basis of a few facts that we choose to connect in a certain way, when really they could be connected other ways, and a whole host of other facts that we have conveniently forgotten, and even more things that we completely imagined that never actually happened.
Mm.
I mean, it's been shown through psychological experiment that people can be made to believe false childhood memories, neutral ones, innocuous ones, but nevertheless they're made to believe that they visited an amusement park that they never visited.
Mm. Yeah, wow. Yeah, and well, illusionists or confidence tricksters are very good at making people believe something about a scenario that they are then confident about and want to believe and interpret that as actual truth, and then the sting comes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Vern Vinci wrote a novel called Rainbow's End. Have
Aha,
you ever
yeah,
read
yes,
that?
I have. Is this the one where this Mr. Rabbit is there and he talks
Yeah.
about this "you've got
Uh-huh.
to believe me" technology?
Yes, the you gotta believe me technology.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, that's a great book. And that's, I guess, the antithesis of the idea of a participatory panopticon in the sense that you're made to sort of believe things really against your will, um, unwillfully believing in certain things. Yeah, well, great book. Recommend it to everybody. Recommend people checking out Werner Vinci's ideas for sure. One of my favorite futurists in the world. Yeah. So yeah, great guy. They say, doing things like basic practice, like hugging people 8 times a day, can give you more oxytocin.
Hmm.
But yeah, it comes down to this question of whether oxytocin is a universal chemical for ultimate altruism, or whether it's just increasing the strength of in group activity, in group bias. Yeah. Mm. So, is there any research into neuroscience that seems to be changing the picture of what morality is that you'd like to mention.
I don't know of any, but that doesn't mean it's not out there.
Yeah. There is. I'm just no expert in the area. I know there's research into how we make decisions. The actual mechanical process that goes on in the brain. That decides. There's phenomena going on way before we're actually conscious of a decision that we've made. For instance, that
Mhm.
yeah, it influences the decision that we make. Yeah. Um, hmm. What about well, why do you think then, if there was a morality pill, if you could take a morality pill without any real serious side effects, would you take it yourself? If you could suddenly just become more moral just by taking a pill?
Well, medications now always come with these warning sheets. I would want to read the entire sheet.
Mm,
Find out how morality is being defined
mm,
and what the side effects of this are.
yeah.
Uh, there's a movie with the comedian Jim Carrey where he can't tell a lie. He goes from being a
Yes.
lawyer who's lying all the time, and then
Mm,
suddenly he can't lie.
mm, yes.
Uh,
I
you
remember
know,
that film.
yeah. So the hypothetical scenario of the crazy man with the gun who walks into the school classroom and sees the teacher and says, "Where are the children?" She says, "They're not here." And actually the children are all hiding in the closet. And he shoots her and then goes to another room. This is not hypothetical. This actually happened in an American school in the state of Connecticut, and it happened just within the last 2 years. Um, if that teacher had not been able to lie, all the children in her classroom would have been shot.
Hmm. Wow. Intense. Yeah. I mean, hmm. So,
So I don't think a morality pill that was defined that had absolutely effective control over our behavior according to a set of parameters that could be specified in the way that a bunch of rules for behavior can be specified would be a safe thing to take.
hmm.
Because the number of different contingencies, different circumstances that human beings are confronted with are so diverse
Hmm.
that um,
Sure. Yeah.
as
It's
in
kind of like, you can't apply Asimov's laws of robotics to, a
mhm.
robot and expect it to do what you want. If there was a pill that gave us some form of, like, simple deontological morality, and encoded that in our brains, yes, I don't think that would work. But what about a pill that gave us an increased ability to evaluate moral choices, to be able to, I guess, calculate utility, for instance, more accurately, and more confidently? Would that be something that you'd be considered taking?
Again, I'd want to read the the sheet that came
Mm.
along with the pill. Um, but I think, like with the use of oxytocin,
Mm.
this is something that should be used clinically in individual cases. So if it were a pill that had an effective duration of 24 hours,
Mm.
I might consider taking it. If it was going to rewire my brain permanently, I would be very cautious. And if I hadn't, um, if there were no experience in my case of very antisocial behavior, that I was concerned about, and most people who engage in that behavior are not that concerned about it.
Mm.
They'd be forced into, taking the medicine.
Mm.
Um, this would be a case when, yeah, perhaps so.
Mm.
Um, you know, there are all kinds of non-specific drugs, including hallucinogenics,
Mm.
that people have taken in traditional cultures. Um, American Indians here in the Southwest taking mescaline in the form of the peyote, or there's the mescal. There's one
Pascal, yeah.
cactus, mezcal, yes, and then the peyote, which is a different psychedelic.
Mm.
And in South America, the uh, ayahuasca that contains DMT,
Mm.
and these are used in the context of the um, shamanistic tradition that wants to help the individual as an individual and as a member of the society.
Mm.
So there is a whole social support network for using these substances and integrating the results in the individual case into the culture, into the society. And when I say society, really I'm talking about not some abstract thing of people that live 1,000 miles away but happen to share your language and your nationality. I mean the people that we interact with on a daily basis, more like that, 150 people
Mm.
that are believed to comprise the size of human tribes in
Mm.
prehistory.
Yeah. 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 Wow. So have you? Do you know many people who have had those drugs and have had positive experiences that helped them? I mean, become better people who claim that. I mean, you
Um,
hear of the stories about it, but
yeah, more like of the stories, and I don't have anyone in my closest circle of friends who have used ayahuasca. I, have internet, you know, quote unquote friends.
mm.
The word friend has become very
Yeah.
watered down these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've communicated with people who have taken it, and I can't independently judge what they tell me about how it's affected them because I only know them through basically text.
Mm.
But positive reports, yes, I've heard.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That'd be interesting. But yeah, I know that some people's physiology doesn't agree with hallucinogens. I've heard people, well, anecdotal stories of well, my friend's cousin took acid, and he ended up not being able to ever get back to reality. His brain chemistry was sort of fundamentally changed, or there was some tipping point which he was pushed off the precipice of, and
Hmm.
yeah, well, this is a story that I heard. I don't know whether it's actually really the case. Yeah.
Yeah, there are. Um, I have taken psychedelics, LSD,
Hmm.
peyote, and psilocybin, um,
Magic mushrooms, hey? Gold
hmm
dust.
and mescaline,
Yep.
but only a few of the natural products. Mostly it was LSD, and when I was um, young and maybe not so foolish, but willing to take those risks. And after a while, after quite a few of these, quite a few meaning a dozen, literally a dozen, um,
In a
I
row.
realized no, over the
Okay.
course of
Okay.
about as many years.
Okay. Yeah.
So, averaging once a year,
Okay. Yeah.
although not actually, happening with that frequency, but
Yeah.
that it averaged out that way. It just
Sure.
so happens. Um, I saw no reason to do this anymore. I'd learned whatever I could learn from these things. I understood, in fact, something that I found later in Zen, in Buddhism, where the Buddha talks about our world, which we tend to think of as objective and out there, is
Mm.
actually a construct of our minds.
Mm.
And I saw that very clearly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That sounds. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. The sort of state you can be in when you're under a drug kind of shows you the contrast between different states of mind quite sharply. Yeah, and I think one can get particularly questioning about what the real tenets of reality are by experiencing with psychedelics. Yeah, for sure. I don't think that everybody gets that though. I think a lot of people wouldn't, and a lot of people do get a little bit of a you know don't really get the philosophical benefits of drug taking than that some people do.
Yeah, I would not recommend it. I think that there are some people who really couldn't handle it. They have a particular brain chemistry, maybe intrinsic, genetically they have this brain chemistry, or they have developed um, a mode of functioning in their brains, their entire bodies, their nervous system, their embodied person, based on many negative life experiences, such that um, taking these drugs could push them over the edge,
Mm,
as in the anecdote that you heard.
mm,
I mean, some people who otherwise have not had problems but are um, genetically predisposed to being fragile
mm,
could be broken by this. Other people who've had actually terrible life experiences but are robust
mm.
could handle these experiences well.
Yeah.
The problem altogether in the way this is used in the West is these are people who are experimenting. This is not a shamanistic culture where you're going to be given this drug and there is someone who's very experienced at dealing with people taking these drugs and have taken himself in the past, and she or he is there to guide you and to make sure you don't fall off the edge.
Mm,
Instead, we have, some 18-year-old kid who on a lark takes this drug with no support, and does something foolish or doesn't know how to respond when a sudden crisis comes up.
mm. Sure. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Have you seen the movie Limitless? Right? You know the one where this particular drug is researched to increase cognitive abilities, and at first it's got no sort of abhorrent side effects, and then like the drug gets perfected. But you've seen it, right?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I have not seen it.
Oh, okay, yeah. A lot of transhumanists quote Limitless as being a really good sort of Hollywood style introduction to the idea of cognitive enhancement. It is interesting. I mean, like it shows that some of the initial trials that drugs can cause consequences that aren't necessarily very good. They have physiological side effects that are not desirable,
Hmm.
and may even cause people to act very selfishly. But hmm. Yeah, at the end of Limitless, the drug has been sort of developed and it's been researched so as to be able to keep people more intelligent at the same time as being able to not develop like harsh dependencies and sort of yeah I guess install abhorrent incentive mechanisms in the brain,
Hmm.
like expand like one sense of yeah um a huge sense of ego or yeah, what was narcissism? Yeah. So yeah, if we did have a drug anyway that could do that, that could do it like relatively cleanly and had like been through trials and was shown to be relatively advantageous with limited amounts of side effects that could enhance not only our intellectual capacity but our moral capacity. Would you then take one of those if the
Are we
trials were done,
talking?
or
Are,
take
are we
them
talking
once?
about? Are we talking about taking it once, or are we taking on a regular basis?
Well, you wouldn't be okay. So the first question is okay. If you take it once and it's obviously you take it once or a few times and it's obviously got advantageous benefits to it. It just makes you think more clearly, makes you memorize things more clearly,
Hmm.
helps you understand moral problems more clearly, and statistically it makes you make more moral decisions across a wider circle of people, um, like quoting Peter Singer's expanding circle of ethical consideration, all these sorts of things, and generally seem to be a like a would increase the odds of a better tomorrow for you and any project that you're involved in, that was morally above board.
So we're talking about a drug that would do for morality what the attention deficit disorder drugs do for attentional focus.
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
guess so. Except I don't know how much ADHD drugs have side effects. Um,
well, quite apart from their side effects, they're very popular drugs of abuse on university campuses.
mm,
Helps students focus and study for exams, helps them take exams, and actually creates an unfair advantage
yeah.
with students who are not taking these. This is an ethical problem in itself.
Mm,
If the ethical enhancement drug um, made the people who take it more ethical
mm,
and left people who didn't take it less ethical.
mm,
And furthermore, if the people who were less ethical were then able to take advantage of the people who were more ethical, there would be a disincentive for taking this enhancement drug.
mm,
So either everybody takes it or nobody takes it,
mhm,
or could you take it once in order to help you overcome limits on your moral vision, and then after that, um, by other means of
mm,
um, self-discipline or some other practices, including meditation, which has been shown mostly not to have side effects, and not entirely though. And I should talk about the side effects of meditation in some cases. But anyway, um, a drug that shows you something and allows you thereafter to get to that place without taking the drug, I'd be willing to take
mm,
one that required continual use, even though it had been shown clinically not to have too many side effects within the duration of the testing,
mm,
has not been tested adequately as far as I'm concerned personally, over a long enough time period. We don't really know the effects of what we're living with right now in our industrial society on our grandchildren. There can be effects going on right now in our genes, in our DNA, that we're not aware of. There can be other effects that are going to affect our individual health, but not until decades after the initial exposures. So, when you look at evolution, um, evolution and adaptation has traditionally happened over many generations, and um, people in ancient cultures who started eating a particular food and they stopped eating the food because they found that there were some problems. It took them a long time to figure that out. We're operating on a much shorter time horizon, and we're not changing a single variable. We're changing a lot of variables at one time. All you know, the pollutants in our environment, the pesticides in our food, genetically modified foods, which I'm not entirely against, but I am also in favor of being labeled. In the United States, where um, we have the best Congress that money can buy, um, it's not legally required to label foods as genetically modified. In Europe, it is. I think consumer awareness is important and exactly what business is afraid of.
mm,
Anyway, um, I I'm sort of an anomaly in a lot of ways, including in the transhumanist movement, in that uh, I want to develop these new things, but I don't necessarily want to deploy them pell-mell. I would like there to be um, a lot of caution taken before we decide that everybody should be using this without any great concern on what the effects might be in the rather distant future, later, later generations even.
Hmm. Yeah, I guess I kind of like the sentiment there. I mean, I do agree that we should be really careful, but I think that also it's a race condition between being careful enough so that there won't be any unintended side effects of drugs or technologies, but being proactive enough so that we can deal with the changing circumstances that we live in right now. We don't know, like we may need benefit from acting quickly in developing certain technologies, certain drugs, or moral enhancers, because that may enable us to be more equipped to deal with looming concerns that may not be all that far away. That we wouldn't have if we were being really overly cautious. So it's a bit of a tension between like an overcautious precautionary principle and
Mm,
a proactionary attitude to the precautionary principle that has been brought up by Max Moore and others. Um, yeah, so there's all sorts of factors. You mentioned that if someone were given, like if certain people were given a moral enhancement pill that given them more of an ability to be able to discern what a moral problem actually was, and would be more likely to make a moral decision, could be sort of taken advantage by somebody who was more Machiavellian, who was didn't take the morality pill, but could actually influence the more moral decision makers. That could be a problem. But let's just say this drug worked really well, and this is a thought experiment. Would you encourage others to take it, or even go so far as enforce others to take it?
I wouldn't force others to take it. I think that would be immoral even without taking the drug.
Yeah.
Um, the Up to a point, people need to be allowed to make their own mistakes.
Hmm. Yeah, but up to a point. Let's just say someone were had a history, recognized history of narcissistic tendencies that could affect other people, or psychopathic tendencies. Although they haven't actually
Mhm.
killed anybody yet, so they weren't in prison, they had signals that their psychology was deemed to be more likely to, participate in some form of, um, yeah, psychopathic tendencies, whether it be axe murdering or just like ripping people off or doing some nasty behavior like stealing, robbery.
Mhm. Um, there's always an interaction between the genetic tendencies and the environment.
Yeah.
There was the case of the psychologist studying psychopathology, and I wish I could remember his name. He's an American, and he was using all the data he could get on these individual cases, including brain scans.
Joshua Green?
Was he the one who discovered that his own brain scan matched those
Oh,
of
no, no,
the
no, no, no.
psychopaths?
Different guy. Yes.
Yeah, this fellow found that he actually had the same uh, brain functional characteristics as the psychopaths he was studying. The difference was in the cases of the psychopaths who had engaged in criminal behavior, they also had abusive childhoods. They had many adverse things happen to them, whereas he was raised in a very loving family.
Mm.
It, with both parents treated him well. He had siblings, who recognized that this guy could be, you know, he's our brother. He can be a bit of an asshole, but we love him anyway. And so he never acted on his worst impulses.
Mm.
So this becomes a social and community issue.
Mm.
And I don't think drugs are going to solve this problem. I don't think any medications will.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Um, we have a problem of a society that has been atomized. Community hardly exists. In traditional, that tribal society of 150 people, uh, you knew your parents and your siblings and your aunts and uncles and your cousins, and you had all of these relations, and maybe you didn't actually get along with your father or your mother too well, but you had this aunt and you had this uncle and you had this grandmother that just treated you so well, and you could always go to them.
Mm.
And very few people live in that kind of circumstance in the industrialized countries anymore.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess it's hard to know, like, what, whether a morality pill would have beneficial societal effects until it was tried. Um, if a morality pill could turn a psychopath, regardless of their living situation, into someone who is less likely to act psychopathically, then I still think it'd be worth using. I mean, like, I think today anyway, psychopaths are often put on medicine. But if it could turn a normal person into like an uber sort of like a Buddha-like or Gandhi-like person that could do all sorts of wonderful things and would act and have character like a really nice normal person, but also not just having characteristics, would be able to you know be an excellent utilitarian and make really good calculated decisions, much like a um, you know much like a what's the name? Oh God, yeah, much like someone who's really good at math would. Then that could generally benefit, especially if large amounts of people took it. But yeah, like we've never really trialed this, and it might create
Yeah.
divisions, inequality too. The thing is, education already does that, and
Mhm.
social situations, difference in lifestyle, differences in wealth gaps, already do these sorts of things.
Mhm.
Um, drugs, well-formed drugs seems to be a more targeted approach.
Well, the genetic predisposition to psychopathic behavior, um, before it gets to the point of the person becoming a mass murderer or something horrible like that, can convey some real advantages to those psychopaths and maybe even to society. I mean, psychopaths who are willing to use people in order to achieve their ends
Mm,
turn out to be incredibly effective military and business leaders.
mm,
Um, they can be charming.
mm,
Uh, they can become, crime bosses or political leaders. And, clearly this has survival advantage. It has reproductive advantage. People who carrying these genes, in a strictly Darwinian sense, are more likely to leave offspring than someone who um, is, meek and mild and always turns the other cheek and is always thinking about the other guy and wouldn't dare harm a fly. So um, let me reach outside the human species altogether. Our genetic relatives, so the great apes, the bonobos, who were said to be closest to in terms of our genetics, and the chimpanzees, who were next. So these are both fairly close relations. Well, maybe one's a first cousin, the other's a second cousin. But there's this really interesting incident that happened in a zoo that had both bonobo and chimpanzee populations. The zoo is in Berlin in the 1940s, World War II.
mm,
And Franz van der Waal talks about this in one of his books. Um, Berlin gets bombed by the United States Air Force, the British Air Force, the Russian Air Force. These bombs are going off, and um, the bonobos and the chimpanzees are not hit by bombs. All they do is hear the explosions. The bonobos became so stressed they died of heart attacks.
Mm.
The chimpanzees, who remember, are engage in warfare.
Mm.
You know, they kill the offspring of some female that they mate with. They want to get rid of the offspring of the last guy.
Mm.
They're not the bonobos who are the peace and love, hippies and use sex to lubricate their social interactions. These are, more like the sack of Troy by the Greeks,
Mm.
more like us. And they survived the bombing. They were stressed, but they didn't have heart attacks. They were used to a conflictual society. Um, this is obviously not the ideal that we would imagine and uphold, but in the world that we live in which um, we're kind of playing a prisoner's dilemma game all the time. Are you going to cooperate? Are you going to defect? Uh, People have their own individual interests that they're aware of, and the selfish genes have their own interest, which is just to make more copies of us by whatever means, fair or foul. Uh, Someone who was artificially, by some intervention like a drug, turned into a moral saint would be vulnerable and maybe would not even be able to make the best contributions to the larger society. Because remember, we're talking very abstractly about making moral decisions, but when you get down to a case by case basis uh, of real dilemmas like the trolley problem, do you push the fat man onto the trolley track in order to save the five people,
Mm.
or do you not? Um, what is the right decision here?
Mm. Well, I guess people who could perform, you know, highly utilitarian, complex utilitarian calculations to be able to know which one affected less people and likely increased the most amount of happiness at the end of the day. Not everybody can really see that. I mean, there's this thing that people naturally seem to cling to, this doctrine of double effect, where if you do things by just pulling a switch, it's better than doing things with your own hand. Like you can
Hmm.
press a button on the other side of the world that kills people, but somehow that's better than going up to them and seeing them, looking them in the eye and stabbing them with a knife. Um, yeah, right. So
Hmm.
somebody who was a had the ability to hyper systematize, and use the virtues, if I can call it, of Asperger's style thinkers, and then use that to be able to perform the right calculus in order to determine what have a clear picture of what was going to harm people the most. Then yeah, it's kind of like, people are often persuaded by one person with a smiling face on an ad about, how to allocate your resources for charity instead of like a number. And so people make a decision based on, like a child's smiling face on a poster more than they will looking at the actual statistics. Is it
Hmm.
right? Is that the way we should be making decisions about how to allocate funds, how to prioritize causes, who to donate to? Um, I think, in a sense, we could benefit from the hyper-systematization, which is what like chimpanzees actually do have, but they don't use that necessarily. They don't. Their systematization isn't directed from a moral standpoint, with that in mind, to a degree, I guess. They seem to be hyper aggressive. They seem to be very hierarchical and quite dangerous in some circumstance. So yeah, look, they dealt with the sound of bombs going off. Taking a morality pill wouldn't necessarily turn you into bonobo, and not think like a hyper systematizing autistic savant would. But yeah. So they don't think like that. But a moral enhancement pill may actually turn you into like an autistic savant, but also increase the likelihood of being able to value moral decisions instead of just valuing one agent's ability to operate and be successful in an environment. So yeah, so in other words, to amplify hypersystematization while de-emphasizing selfishness or greed. Or what's a better word to say? I can't think of one. Mm,
It might again lead to the kind of problem that I pointed to, where those who take it and those who don't
mm,
um, operate very differently relative to one another.
mm,
So someone who takes the morality pill
mm,
and becomes a moral autistic savant, or an autistic savant of morality, um, is viewed by other people who have not taken it as being inhuman. They're not responding the way a normal person
mm.
would, according to the average person's definition of
According to the
normality.
social norm at the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so they're seen as being very strange. Um, they're I, I don't know if I should bring this up because I don't remember enough details about it, but I recall reading about an early hominid fossil,
Yeah.
and this hominid was unusual in that its species had an extremely large brain case.
Yeah, they're called boscops. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
I read about that too. It's Yeah, Richard Dawkins commented on it, and they wondered whether they were going to be like, very good philosophers, whether they were actually, more intelligent than human species is under, is or intelligent in a different way, or more able to calculate better is
mhm.
is controversial. But it's also controversial whether they're actually a different species. If they were, maybe they died out because most of the children being born had massive skulls and killed the mothers, and or maybe they just, like, I imagine, maybe they just weren't really good at war. Maybe they were more thinkers or philosophers than spear throwers, and yeah.
Hmm.
I'll
Yeah,
let you
yeah, it
tell
could
the
be.
story, but like, I've actually been interested in that subject too. It's a great.
Yeah, if you point me to more information about them, I'd be interested in reading it.
Oh, look, I just googled. I don't remember all the information was. I just remember reading about boscops, and then reading afterwards. It wasn't clear whether they were different species or whether they were a particular example of a separate branch of hominids than what was normally around at the time. They were just like anomalies. Um, yeah, but it was interesting. I mean, like the way that they were buried was
Hmm.
was interesting. Like the way that they seemed to have like buried the way that they were buried seemed to indicate an interest in like the afterlife, or an interest in like some form of ritualistic behavior that wasn't common at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it showed some sensitivity and respect that was uncommon at the time.
Mm. Yeah. 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 So I think there's something to it. But why they died out, it is unclear. It's extremely unclear. There's no evidence of spear wounds or anything like that that I could see, that I read about. But yeah, like there may have been like a certain optimal point between like um, biological natural selection favoring intelligence enough so that a large amount of like mothers died in childbirth and children died in childbirth. But beyond that certain point, would, kill too many children and too many mothers so that the species wouldn't be able to really feasibly procreate and spread genes as much as one with not a quite so large brain pan or head size. Yeah.
I wonder about our own. I mean, I was present at the birth of all three of my children,
Yeah.
and it's like not a well-engineered size for the birth canal for those heads coming out.
I know. Yeah. It's amazing that like natural selection, has favored like animals with large heads. To me, it's an example that intelligence has been recognized as being powerful by our blind, designer. The process of natural selection. It's been that efficacious that massive amounts of like our ancestors probably would have died in childbirth, and whether it be the child or the woman or the lady. Yeah. Just because we're lucky we live in a day and age where we can take measures to counteract this, like the problem of having children and mothers die in childbirth, for sure. So it's an interesting phenomenon. But yeah, intelligence is powerful, right? We can see its optimizing effect in the world all around us. But the thing is, this is the problem. I mean, you look at evolution. It designed an optimization process which, intelligent species, which seems to be invalidating its own efficaciousness. Um, yeah, so it's evolution maybe has taken it a step to optimizing itself out of the picture, because now we can create better ways of doing things. We've created all forms of technology that enable us to survive in the environment, and we no longer, like a lot of the world is covered in cities. Cities grow up all over the place, and
Mhm.
forests growing in less amounts of parts of the world. The whole landscape of like the face of the earth, a lot of it has changed. The power struggle is not really between, claws and teeth, or the ability to run fast or fly or swim fast or hide. It's actually the ability to manipulate the environment to choose what we want to, to suit our values and goals. But we might be doing exactly the same thing by developing these technologies, these optimization uh, sort of phenomena in outside of our own brains, like create AI or create just automation that invalidates our need, the need for us to be there. So we're
I
optimizing
think,
the optimizers. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's really important that we make sure that we stay inside the control loop,
Mm.
because we could easily be replaced, well, maybe not easily and not soon, but eventually and completely by our mind children.
Mm.
The artificial systems that think faster than we do are dispassionate and have utilitarian values in which our existence does not feature as a major interest.
Mm.
You
Mm.
know, we may be useful for a while, but who knows how long that would be.
Mm. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, like this philosophic calculus may end up like finding better uses for the resources in the world. I mean, people often say like an AI may not hate us, may not love us, but might find better uses for our atoms, our cells. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, and it,
And so
sure, we
that's
are
why I say
biased, but
like
I think we have our own interest in making sure that that doesn't happen.
yeah, that's true. And like, with all this optimization going on around us, our ability to understand it and to make moral decisions about it should be um, sort of in at par with the advancement of technology. I mean, because our wisdom and our ability to make moral decisions isn't keeping up with our ability to create powerful technology, maybe we should be developing technology to help us keep up morally with the ability to make a sense of very difficult moral problems, so that we're less likely to be able to make wrong and very disadvantageous decisions about how to use technology. Obviously, dropping a bomb, like getting angry and pressing that red button so that the people in Russia suffer, is a really bad idea. What's his name? There's a guy was who seemed to be really on the ball when he saw that his his system was indicating to him that the Americans had sent missiles to Russia and should have, according to rules, returned the favor. And he was thinking, well, there's got to be a mistake here. It just doesn't feel right. There's something wrong. I'm going to suspend judgment until I have more information. But his scanners looked like there were flashes over a missile zone where Americans had their missiles pointed at Russia, and he didn't react, and he didn't send the missiles in any retaliatory missiles back. At the end of the day, what happened was there were clouds over the missile base in America that were reflecting the sun, right? And so, because of this one man making the right decision, we averted a missile crisis. If
Yeah.
if he had have interpreted the stimulus according to some sort of like a simple deontological rule set that he was given by his superiors, then maybe we wouldn't be around here to talk about it, and maybe the world would be a much worse place. In fact, he got punished, I think, or he actually copped a bit of disdain by his superiors for making that decision, even though it was the right one. But we need people who can make the right decisions under pressure, who are smart and moral enough to be able to make sense of complex ethical problems on the ball at opportune times. And I'm not sure if we do have enough people like that right now. And I'm saying,
Well, we certainly have some, and he's an example. There's another Russian example from the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Russian submarine that, like the American systems, required two officers simultaneously to use their keys and press their codes to launch missiles. And the captain was willing to launch, but his second in command was not willing to launch. That would have triggered World War III right there if they had launched those missiles, because the United States, would have done the same thing, and that was just because one submarine commander on his own decided that the United States Navy blocking Russian ships from going to Cuba was engaged in an act of war. And actually, technically, according to international law, a blockade like that is an act of war. So there have been a lot of cases, way more than most people know, that had the world this close to nuclear war. And that's just in the 20th century. We don't even know what might have been going on now. We do know that we've got more non-state actors, so-called terrorist groups, that seem to be willing to do things that military officers in regular armies are not willing to do on a regular basis.
right? You mean like like a terrorism? You mean?
Yeah, terrorism of targeting civilians, destroying. Well, in order to make a point, you use terror because terror is cheap. Fear is cheap. It's a lot cheaper than actually rewarding people for good behavior.
A lot cheaper than education, right? Or proper
Oh
education.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the cheapest. And
Mm.
you take a very successful, famous psychopath, Joseph Stalin. He recognized you can get a lot done by killing a few people and imprisoning a lot more.
Mm.
Um, what you got done was actually not very high quality, but it got done,
Mm.
and it was cheap. It was very cheap.
Mm.
Prison labor is about as cheap as you can get. It's essentially slavery.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's have you looked at Steven Pinker's Better Angels of Our Nature?
I actually heard him give a talk about that here in New Mexico
Wow.
a few months ago,
Hmm.
and um, he has some good arguments and evidence.
Mm.
I'm not completely persuaded.
Sure. So what do you think is arguing that there is a decline in violence?
Yeah, he has a lot of data indicating an overall decline in violence. That there are fewer people being killed now in war, and there are fewer wars going on than over the long span of human history. The ancient Greeks considered war to be the normal state of affairs. Peace was unusual.
Mm.
Uh, but their wars and our wars were somewhat different. So, we have a few anomalous, large magnitude conflicts in the 20th century, the
Mm.
First and Second World Wars. But once you take those out or average them out over the size of the global population, then the numbers look better.
Mm.
But you know, no one who was involved in the Trojan War had the capability of launching nuclear missiles. They couldn't destroy
Mm.
every large city on Earth
Mm.
and poison the rest of the population with long-lasting radioactive isotopes.
Mm.
We're um, at the point where a small number of people with access to powerful technologies um, could, do things like something like that. Um, the we're mentioning Werner Vinge's
You got to believe the
Rainbow's
frequency.
End, and well, the surveillance going on there, the requirement that every computer had to have a backdoor that the government could use to enter to make sure that you weren't a terrorist, the fact that there were something that's currently against the law in the United States, using the United States military for police purposes.
Mm.
In that novel, the main characters, the son of Joseph Gu and the parents of his granddaughter, remember, they were Marines. They were United States Marine officers, and their duty was to cover the southwestern United States.
Mm.
And they were on hair trigger launch, where they would launch into the lower atmosphere, so at which point they could destroy with lasers and other weapons point targets. I mean, just annihilate them.
Mhm.
There's the event not described in the book but alluded to in the past, that an American city had been destroyed. And remember, there's a passage that says, well, it's been a long time since Chicago, but more recently Quito, Ecuador got destroyed. I don't, it was never specified whether it was by nuclear weapons or something else.
Mm.
But as Vinci says, technology had advanced to the point where it was cheap enough and small enough that some guy with a bad hair day could destroy a city. Someone who got up on the wrong side of the bed had that technical capability. And in order to guard against this happening, we have universal surveillance. Your computers are all being monitored. There are video cameras everywhere. Um, and then the thing that they're afraid of, that you got to believe me, technology, where the population that's being surveilled um, could be basically, um, what can I say, hypnotized,
Mm.
controlled,
Manipulated. Yeah.
yeah, manipulated successfully, completely beyond their ability to resist.
Mm.
Um, that was the technology that was theoretical, but was believed to be possible,
Mm.
and that every country's uh, intelligence agencies was monitoring everything, all the media and all communications, for fear that such a weapon would be deployed. Uh, so it's the opposite of the kind of morality drug you're talking about. It's the enslavement drug.
Mm. Right. Yeah. I guess that requires a real sort of you know, world state government and sort of top-down, complete dictatorial leadership. I mean, or it would be dictatorial through suggestion or just plain manipulation. Yeah. Look, I think that if it was the case that there were significant benefits for doing such, that if it was done in a benevolent way where everybody at the end of the day was saved from themselves, and people were dragged kicking and streaming into some form of utopia through this mechanism, I'd probably agree with it, but I haven't seen any case where that's actually really happened.
Mm,
And levers
mm,
of control. Who's watching the watchers, right?
right, that's the problem. And you look at the two great dystopian novels of the 20th century, 1984 and
Yeah.
Brave New World.
Oh yeah.
1984 is the absolute horror, and Brave New World is, well, that's too bad. But actually, no one's being tortured.
Hmm.
Everything's being managed. It's a kind of Plato's Republic, really. Um, there are different social classes that people are bred into. In Plato's Republic, there's what Socrates calls the noble lie, that people are told that you were born into a particular class because this is where you were supposed to be,
Hmm.
and it's a lie, but it's a noble lie. It's for
Hmm.
good purposes. It's for the everyone's happiness. And so in Brave New World, everything is being managed so that people are happy, and their sex and procreation are divorced from one another. So sex is just a recreational activity, and the reproduction is all managed in order to assure there are enough people at each of the
Hmm.
intelligence classes. And then there are five world controllers who manage different parts of the globe,
Hmm.
and our heroes, the malcontents,
Hmm.
end up being hauled before one of these world controllers, who tells them that they're not going to be killed or imprisoned or anything. They're going to be sent to a small island in a hostile climate. And I remember this more clearly than perhaps any other part of the book. This world controller's name was Mustafa Mond,
Hmm.
and he said, "In many ways, I envy you because you can be as free as you want to be. There will be no control. There's enough food. You'll be able to get by. It'll be a difficult life,
Yeah.
but a free one."
Hmm. Yeah, 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 yeah. This harsh environment was much like the jungle really. So it was he was put into a survival of the fittest island. Yeah, well that's interesting. That these plot devices have really interesting sort of morality tales, but I I'm kind of a bit concerned that people would take Brave New World and see that particular picture as being the future of humanity, whereas we know if like David Pierce were this benevolent dictator, he'd be trying to make everybody happy and make machines do all the work, and give people the opportunities for fruitful lives, flourishing lives, instead of trying to breed people, subhumans in a lot of cases, in order to fulfill specific tasks without that much regard to their mental state, whether they were happy or not. Mm. I don't know. Where was Soma? Was Soma part of Brave New World or
Yeah.
1984? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right.
Soma was the perfect intoxicant.
Mm.
You know, if sex wasn't enough
Perfect.
to
Yeah,
get you out of your funk, you would take Soma,
yeah.
and it was not addictive. It had um, no significant side effects whatsoever. Uh, so between Soma and sex and sports and the movies or the feelies where you had haptic
Mm.
sensory inputs so you could experience what the characters on the screen were experiencing. Um,
I
the
just thought
populace
Soma
was
would make you more sort of agreeable and less smart. I thought it was like a real it made you sort of dumb. Yeah.
kind of like alcohol.
Yeah, but alcohol, at least gives people. I don't know. Alcohol for some people makes them really creative. I really do think, even though it's a depressant. But yeah, well, I'm trying to find. Yeah, but so what's your description of Soma? Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in. Um, it comes from a Hindu word.
Oh yeah, in Hindu mythology, it's the drug of immortality.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, Brave New World. Yeah, David Pierce is doesn't particularly like the Brave New World book, or at least the outlook, because it's very dystopian in a sense, isn't it? Where everybody's just like treated like a cog, and
Hmm.
the society is developed in such a way not to optimize the internal, the hedonistic state of the actors, but really just to make sure society for its own sake, you maintains stable, I guess.
Yeah, did you ever read the Werner Vinge's short story, The Sorcerer's Apprentice?
Oh, I might have. Yeah, right. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
it's actually the peddler's apprentice. The peddler seems to be a sorcerer, but
Mm.
he's actually a guy who uses biostasis to travel through
Oh.
time into the future. And he
Yeah, I think I
encounters,
did. Yeah, a long time
yeah,
ago.
the society. He comes out of his cave, and things are pretty primitive in the hill
Mm.
country. But then he finds out that down on the plains there are cities, and it's
Mm.
part of a world government that has kept society in something like a Brave New World stasis. It's all balanced. The
Mm.
population is chemically controlled,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there's a master computer system that is operated by the world controller. In this case, are some individuals who use a um, a kind of immortalizing technology that allows them to transfer their minds from one body to another. So it's a 10,000-year-old leader
Mm.
um, who is killed by the peddler's apprentice, this hill
Mm.
country boy, and our the peddler who happens to know the back doors to get into the computer system and crashes the
Mm.
system that the world state relies on. And his rationale for doing this is that stasis was bad for business. He bought things in one time era and then traded them in a future
Mm.
time era,
Mm.
and he just wants to see how things turn out. He just wants to keep going through time into the future, and he wants to see evolution. He doesn't want to see stasis.
Mm. Yeah. Well, the thing is, if we did have some form of like Brave New World where it was just like a complete static state where people were maintained as cogs, were not really all that much happier than they were 100 years ago. I mean, there was no progression. it seems like it wouldn't be a utopia. It'd be more like a, yeah, sort of a static sort of dystopia. Hmm.
Yeah, so Socrates' question, whether it's better to be a happy pig or an unhappy philosopher.
Hmm. Yeah, well, this is the thing. How do you compare the quality of experience? Is it just based on like a hedonic level, or is it based on, a lot of other factors, or the quality of hedonia? So a depressive philosopher, the quality of experience may be, I guess, in my opinion, possibly better than like a happy pig, but it really would depend, right? I mean, the usefulness of a philosopher's insights, depressive or not, is is a factor, and the usefulness of a pig's sort of internal feeling, other than to itself, um, is not is considered. Or I could really couldn't consider how much a happy pig would contribute to society if we couldn't find out what it was being happy about. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
hard
but
question, really. It's a very difficult question.
yeah, and I don't believe that we should judge everything on the basis of our own interest as human beings, our species, our
Mm,
society.
sure.
Uh, the whole web of life on Earth that we're part of.
Mm,
I think we need to respect,
mm,
including the pigs
mm.
and other creatures. So they have intrinsic value.
Yes. Yeah, of course. Like any sentient life form should really.
Hmm.
And how do we determine that? We don't know yet. I think there's a lot of research going on into brain, neurosciences may help. There was recently, or this last year or the year before last, a personhood behind the human conference. Did you go to that? I know IEET was very involved.
Which conference?
Personhood Beyond the Human conference, is it?
Oh, the person
Yeah.
beyond the human. I was aware of it, but no, I didn't go to that.
Hmm.
That was the timing and the distance and that just didn't work for me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So it's interesting that there's been lawyers giving great apes and other sort of higher life forms, um, trying to argue for them to have legal rights, or to be
Hmm.
considered in the legal system as personhoods, as giving them actually a personhood status, which is, I thought, really really great. Mm. But yeah, so regarding moral enhancement, what's a good way? Have you got any sort of insights that you'd like people to take away from this conversation that you'd like to focus on?
Uh, Moral enhancement, I think, is something that um, is a group effort. It's not a matter of just treating some individual cases, except in extreme clinical cases of people who show very um, antisocial maladaptive behavior.
Hmm.
Know everybody getting oxytocin that
Mm.
would just change everybody in the same ways and ways that are good for in-group but not for out-group.
Hmm.
Um, Education and moral suasion, the uh, increasing um, sense of what is good and ethical, so that things that were in the past considered to be fine, like slavery, are considered to be completely unacceptable. Um, and as I mentioned also, some kind of global sense of humanity existing in what Ayodhya Samraj calls prior unity. It's not that we're trying to join together, but we see that we're already a single living species, and we need to get our acts together um, in ways that are um, not being supported by the current power systems, political and economic, about competing nation states and competing economic entities. We need to have more communication and cooperation. Simplest way to put this is in a very simple formula that Adida proposes in his book, Not to His Peace. Cooperation plus tolerance equals peace.
Excellent. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, it's been great having you on the show, and yeah, viewers, if you want to check out the other two videos, we've got one on what was the first part about? This one was about moral enhancement. The previous one was about cyborg Buddha, and then the other one was just a general background, talking about what you do and your interest in the transhumanism. So yeah, it's been great. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Adam.
Cheers.